So it is. Well, good morning, everyone. For those who have grew up in Christian denominations, we're all familiar with this. This is Palm Sunday, and as Wendy said in the beginning, there was something always very special about what was called Holy Week. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and of course the implications of that are for everyone. It is about all of our spiritual growth. Emmett Fox says we have to look at the Bible and consider that the characters in the Bible are representative of states of mind or states of consciousness. And in that regard, they represent each and every one of us at different phases of our life, at different points in our development. And for that reason, we can look and we can take inspiration regardless of how we might have been raised, what denominations we were raised in. So we want to kind of look at these events that are described in the New Testament and in other writings. We want to look at them a little bit in historical context. We want to look at them a little bit in cultural context. But most importantly, we want to look at it and say, well, what does that mean to me? You know, what can this do to help me on my path being spiritual growth. And spiritual growth is every day, just dissolving a little bit more every day of the ideas, the beliefs, the opinions, the things that we hold to be true that are not true, the things that separate us in consciousness from that which is one, from that which is all. If we wish to be physically fit, we engage in a discipline, a practice of certain exercises, certain diet, certain things that we do, but we must do them consistently, you know. I like the commercial on TV where the guy goes in the gym and he does one push-up and then picks up his mat and goes home. We all know that just won't get it. That just won't get it. So what we're talking about today is what can we learn? What can we learn? How can we interpret? How can we take away from the teachings around Palm Sunday? How can we take away a message that helps us to move forward? Now, I think another thing when we look at the New Testament scriptures, we have to understand the culture from which they came and the time from which they came. The Aramaic language, which was spoken in that area at that time, only had about 4,000 words in the whole vocabulary. So each word had multiple meanings. And you still find that in English today. I mean, if you pick any word and go to the dictionary and look at it, you will find several meanings. And then you will find one that is almost the opposite of the others, you know. And what that means is that it would be impossible, I believe, because I tried it with German, but I believe it would be impossible for someone who does not speak English to pick up a book that's written in English and then look in an English dictionary and try to interpret what the sentences are saying, because there's so much that comes to us from the context that somebody who speaks the language can look at it and say, oh yes, well this is what this means. But if you go to the dictionary and you look up each and every word, you would say, well, how did you get that meaning? You know, why did you choose this definition as opposed to the other definitions? And the answer is in the context. So we have to kind of understand then that over the years, over the thousands of years, there are many different teachers, many different preachers, many different ministers who pick up the same book, read it, and interpret it differently. And I'm not saying that the message that they deliver from that isn't a good message, right? Because I believe a lot in inspiration, that we're kind of led to the ideas that ought to be presented at a certain time. But many of the teachers do not understand the context, and may take things out of context, and may therefore interpret things in a manner that they were not originally intended. So I use the example when I'm teaching or talking to students is, how many of us read Shakespeare and understand Shakespeare as written? You know, and many people don't. We have to. I have to get the Cliff's Notes to tell me what is going on. I don't understand. You know, and it's written in English, and it's written in English from the 1600s or the 1500s thereabouts. Not too long ago, 400 or 500 years ago. And yet we lose we lose over time the context, the pronunciation, the nuances of the language. We don't understand what's really going on. I'll just give you one example. And what I'm trying to say here is that what may have actually been going on 2,000 years ago and the way it's been interpreted since then may be two different things. But in the Aramaic language, as I said, they only had 4,000 words. And in the written language, which a lot of people did not read, right? They understood, but they did not read. In the written language, there were no vowels. There were only consonants. And the way that the vowel sound was indicated was they would put a little mark over or under a particular consonants, dots and jittles. And depending on the shape of that mark and the position of that mark, that informed the reader as to what appropriate vowel sound was to be used in the pronunciation of that word. And over time, the scrolls would get dirty. Dots would appear where there weren't dots, little specks of dirt. Maybe some dots would get rubbed off or fade away. And people who did not understand the context kind of came up with totally different meanings. And one such example, I think you'll remember, it's the parable of the rich man. And the rich man comes to Jesus and says, I do everything I'm supposed to do. I observe the holy days, I keep the commandments, I do all the things, I contribute my temple tax, I do all the things I'm supposed to do. What else do I need to do to get into heaven? And the instruction was, he was told, take all your material goods and sell them and give to the poor and come follow me. And we're told in the scripture that he walked away muttering. Right? And then the follow-up is, Jesus tells the disciples, he says, it's easier for the camel to get through the eye of the needle than it is for the rich man to get into heaven. That's a mistranslation. That's a misunderstanding. The word for camel and the word for rope in the Aramaic written language, it was just one dot or one jittle that separated the two. And it was an idiom that was used in Aramaic, and it said it's easier for a rope to get through the eye of the needle. And we would say, well, how do you get a rope through the eye of the needle? Well, a rope was what they called the heavy thread that they used in sewing tents. And in order to get that thread started through the eye of the needle, the sewer had to untwist it. You've probably done this yourself or seen your mom do it. You kind of untwist the thread a little bit, stick it in your mouth, and you pull the centerpiece to a point, and you push that through the needle, and then you pull hard, and you get the thicker part to come through. Now, the interpretation over the years, people have come to a similar understanding. They said, well, there was a special gate. It was called the eye of the needle, and it was very narrow. And for the camels to get through there, the people riding the camels had to get off. They had to take the saddles off. They had to take all the equipment off, and that's how they got through the eye of the needle. Same idea. You had to let go. You had to release something in order to get through, right? But totally out of context. So this is why I'm just saying we can't look at things that were written in a different language, in a different time, in a different culture, thousands of years ago, and look into the book and say, oh, well, that's what that means. That may be what that means for us, and it may be a good meaning, it may be an inspired meaning, but it's not necessarily what it meant at the time. So all of this by way of saying, I grew up in the Catholic Church. I was an altar boy, and as Wendy said, the Holy Week was kind of the high point of the year. Now Christmas was big, right? But as I said in the email last night, Christmas was not the most important holiday in Christendom. When the Puritans first came to this country, it was against the law to close your shop and take off Christmas Day. And the reason for that was the Puritans felt that by celebrating Christmas, people were diminishing the Easter holiday. And Easter was the defining event of the Christian world. Right? Everybody's born. Everybody dies, but not everybody raises from the dead. See, that was their reasoning. That was their thinking. So when I was, and you have to understand the times of preparation. So Lent starts with Ash Wednesday, and the ashes that the priests use to put the sign of the cross on your head, those are the ashes of the palm leaves from last year. The palm leaves, since they are blessed before they are handed out, they can't be just discarded. Anything that is blessed has to be burned or buried. This is not just in the Catholic Church, this is in other religions as well. It's a respect for the sacredness of the item. So the palm leaves that were used last year on Palm Sunday are collected and burned, and the ash from those palm leaves is what is used to mark the forehead of the adherents on Ash Wednesday. But it's 40 days of preparation, 40 days, right? Now keep in mind that in that culture, 4 meant physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and 0 was an indefinite amount of time, right? So you get 40 days and 40 nights it rained, and Moses went into the desert for 40 years to prepare for his work, and Jesus went into the desert for 40 days to prepare for his work. And all of these things are kind of trying to say the same thing. As long as it took to get it together physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, there was a time of preparation. There was a time of dedicating oneself to the coming tasks. There was a time of growth. The person could not do the mission that they were called to do until they grew into it. I think that's very important to remember. They had to grow into it. And these are the kind of the things that we are being told. So if we don't understand that context, then 40 days of Lent and 40 days of Advent and those things, we kind of miss the importance or the significance of what they're telling us. They're telling us that we as individuals, we too are engaged in an act of preparing ourselves. And you would say, well, what are we preparing ourselves for? And as I said in the beginning, we are preparing ourselves every day for a greater experience of the conscious realization of the presence and the activity of the divine in our lives. That's the mystical experience. That is the experience of the Christ within. That is what we're talking about. So the scriptures are kind of laid out. Each author of each book of the New Testament had a different agenda. They were writing to a different audience. They were writing for different purposes, and this is why some don't mention Christmas narrative at all. And Luke, for example, spends a lot of time on the Christmas narrative and all of these different things. And some of them were trying to say, well, the events that happened in the life of Jesus, they were prophesized years ago. So they were taking the event and they were going back and they were looking and they were saying, yes, so back in Isaiah when it said this, that meant this, right? They were kind of doing that parallel construction. And this is a little bit of what we come to when we come to Palm Sunday. So very succinctly, if we look at the narrative of Palm Sunday, it is Passover. It is the Passover week. And at that time, Judaism was a religion of the temple. What that meant was everybody who was Jewish had to go to the temple a couple times a year for certain holidays, with Passover being one of them. So you can imagine the turmoil, you can imagine the crowds, you can imagine these people coming from all over the countryside, and they're getting together, and cousins haven't seen each other for 6 months or a year, and brothers and sisters and, grown children, they haven't seen each other, and everybody's coming together in this spirit of joyful celebration, you see? And they would come into Jerusalem, and they would carry the palm branches, and they would sing, and they would march into Jerusalem to go to the Passover holiday. Now, at the same time that this is going on, at the time when Jesus lived, the Romans were in charge. Pontius Pilate was in charge, and there were a lot of people who did not want them to be there. There were people who were trying to actively get them out of there, and the Romans were very, very harsh with anyone who gave them a hard time. Their answer was crucify them, hang them to a tree, crucify him, let the body hang there as a sign to everybody else not to do this, In a similar fashion, if you come forward to medieval England, they used to do a similar thing. They would execute prisoners, and they would take their body and display it in public until it rotted away. A warning sign for everybody. So they were very harsh, and Pontius Pilate himself was relieved of his command, recalled for being so harsh. So you have the Romans who are looking at this event of all of these people coming into the temple, coming into Jerusalem, knowing that there are people who don't want them there. There could be trouble. There could be riots. There could be there could be an attempt to overthrow them. So they're watching very, very cautiously for anything out of the ordinary, that they'll put it down quickly. Now, I will mention to you, if you're interested in that aspect that I just mentioned, get John Dominic Crossman's book about the biography of Jesus. I think it's called A Revolutionary Biography. He really does a great job of setting the historical context in a manner that I never saw growing up, that I never understood growing up. But you can imagine today, what we see today is when people are descending, for example, on a big city, and they're coming to the big city, and they want to protest and all these kind of things. The police are on edge. They're looking for trouble, And if anybody steps out of line, the first thing they're going to do is grab them and haul them away. And this was kind of the environment that was actually going on there. Now, the New Testament tells us that Jesus rode into Jerusalem, and he was riding on an ass, and that was to fulfill a prophecy. And the people were waving their palm leaves, and they were singing Hosanna in the highest. Now, we'd have to go back and look at that and say, well, people were marching and waving their palm leaves anyway. How much of this actually had to do with his presence, and how much of this was what was what was normally going on. But I'd say that doesn't matter when we get to the level of spiritual interpretation, see? Because when we get to the level of spiritual interpretation, I think there's an important lesson that we can draw from this. But I just wanted to set kind of the context and hopefully create a little bit of interest that you might go look up John Dominic Crossman's book and take a peek at it, especially if you grew up in a Christian denomination. It gives you a totally different way of looking at it. I'll give you another book as well as we're coming into Easter, and that's Thomas Sheehan, S-H-E-E-H-A-N, Sheehan, or S-H-E-E-A-N, I guess it must be S-H-E-E-H-A-N, Sheehan. And it's called The First Coming. And it is an excellent book that tries to look at the first century and what the followers of Jesus actually believed. Okay? And their realization of what the Christ means and when that came about. See, these books were written over time, distant years apart. And as ideas evolved, they emerged in the newer books as they came along, until we get to John. which is very much about the mystical experience, the mystical experience. So, as a young boy, being an altar boy, what would happen is we would get boxes and boxes and boxes of palm branches in before Palm Sunday holiday, and we had to come in and get hacksaws and cut the stub off the bottom, and then separate the leaves so there would be enough palm leaves to hand out. And then all during Holy Week, there were different rituals that we participated in, different ceremonies. There were the Stations of the Cross, there were evenings of prayers. There was all these different things that we did leading up to Palm Sunday, and then past Palm Sunday, leading up to Easter, leading up through Holy Week. There was Good Friday. There was the Last Supper on Thursday. All of these different things, and they all had special significance. All had special significance to do with the growth of the soul. But I didn't quite get that. I didn't quite understand that as a child. We went through the ritual. As altar boys, we knew the Latin responses and what to say. But being able to look at that ceremony that I was participating in, and understanding what it meant to me personally, and how it was a motivation for me to participate more fully in my own growth. I didn't understand that then, and now I get it. Now I start to get it. See, now I can see how all of these things are laid out, and how if we truly accept the fact that our growth is our responsibility, we must participate. The journey begins with a step, but you can't just take one step and then turn around and go back. You can't walk a quarter of a mile and then say, oh, look over there. Isn't that pretty over there? I think I'll take this road and see where it goes. Now, we do that. See, as human beings, we do that. We're going to talk about that briefly, why we do that. So what I took away, my big question as a child growing up and hearing the priest read the scripture about Palm Sunday, I could never understand how is it that on Palm Sunday, Jesus is riding into Jerusalem and he's being celebrated as a hero, people waving palm branches, right? Saying Hosanna in the highest, all of these things. And a few days later, they're calling for his death. How did this happen? That was always my big question. Now, part of it is the way that it's portrayed, the way that the entrance to Jerusalem was portrayed in the New Testament, as I say, might be a mixture of people were celebrating Passover as much as Jesus' followers were welcoming him. But there's still this question, what is the spiritual significance of being so excited? Here is the Christ. Here is the presence of the divine. Here is the point where God has become human. And people are celebrating that. And then a few days later, they're saying, crucify him. Crucify him. And I wrestled with that. I wrestled with that question for years, and I'm glad I did. Because here's where I got with it. And this is where I got. You may get someplace else, and that's okay. Because it's your journey. It's not mine. I have to walk my path. I've got to put my feet one in front of the other, and you must find your path and you must walk it. But I'm just going to share with you where I got, because maybe it'll help somebody else along the way. And what I came down to was, oh my goodness, that was a false start. That was a false start. How many false starts have we had in our lives? How many times have we read about a new diet and said, oh wow, this is it. This is the one for me. I'm going to order all that food. I'm going to change the grocery order for next week. I'm going to send away for the protein shakes and all of those kind of things. And we do it for a week or a month, and then we go back to our old ways. We read it. I love the infomercials with the exercise gear, you know. They have all these different things. You just buy this one piece of exercise gear for 3 easy payments, and oh my God, you know, your body is just transformed like almost overnight, kind of like magic, you know. And we send away, we used to laugh. We used to have people, we'd have a church yard sale in Durham, and people would bring in all of their belly busters and all these different things that they bought and they weren't using anymore. It's a false start, you see. We get excited. We get excited. We want to do something. We jump up. We say yes. And then very shortly thereafter, we go right back to the way we were. When I was in sales, in direct sales, you know, every sales organization that ever existed has these annual sales conferences, and they bring all the salespeople in from the field, and everybody gets together, and you know, there's good food and there's entertainment, but it's all kind of a pump you up kind of thing, you know. And you're surrounded by people who are all pumped up, and everybody's getting pumped up, you know. And towards the end, they stand up and they say, "Now, who's going to commit to hitting that?" In my day, it was the $100,000 mark. Who's going to make $100,000 in personal sales this year? You know, and everybody would stand up, yeah, and everybody would cheer, and everybody would, yay, you know, we're all going to do it. And then we all go back to the airport and go home and go back to work, and, you know, well, yeah, that was nice in the moment, but, you know, that ain't going to happen. Now, how many times do we make false starts in our life, and how many times do we do it with our spiritual growth? I think we all have moments, we all have times when we slip over into the mystical, into the bliss, into that feeling of unconditional love, of the awe, you know. Sometimes we would do a meditation, a group meditation in church, and people would cry, you know. They'd be just sitting there crying, and somebody asked, well, you know, why do people cry during a meditation? And I think it was the same reason that your eyes water if you look at the sunlight, if you look into direct sunlight. We experience sometimes that moment of unconditional love, that moment of bliss, that moment of joy, that moment that tells us there is this presence within us, around us, and through us. The very love of God is here. Hosanna in the highest. We celebrate it. We're excited about it. You know, we jump up and say, yes, 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 this is it. This is it for me. I am completely dedicated to doing my practice, to doing my growth, to doing all the things that I need to do in order to be in this experience, this conscious experience of the presence and the activity of God, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence and the activity of God. And we do that, you know, we do that. We would see people come to church, and they would spend a couple weeks and be very excited and very enthusiastic about what they were hearing, about what they were reading, about the books they were buying. And then something would happen, never would know what. Something would happen and they would go away. We'd never see them again. And I just have to trust that whatever they were looking for, they got in that time that they were with us. They were there for a reason. They got what brought them in that door. But then they were gone. I'm not picking on those people, because God bless them, they are wonderful people. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about us. I'm asking everybody to look in the mirror and say, have you ever jumped up in the enthusiasm of the moment and said, yes, I'm going to do this. And then 2 weeks later, you got busy doing something else. To me, that's what Palm Sunday is about. We become excited about the presence of the divine in our lives. We become excited about the activity of the divine in our lives. And then we go back to the way we were. So our spiritual growth then, see this whole thing that we're going to get to next week with Easter, our spiritual growth is getting out of that human experience where we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and being born again as spiritual beings. So why do we do this? Why do human beings do that? Why do we get excited and say that we're going to do something and begin and then stop, and then begin and then stop? Now, I think the first thing we have to accept and realize is that doing so only delays, right? Only delays. As Wendy said in the opening, the difference between where we are and where we expect to be is the steps we haven't taken. Right? But it might also be the steps that we took and then reversed. It might also be the steps that we took to the sides. Instead of going forward in a straight line, we went over here, we went over there, like children making their way home from school and going by the playground and going by the candy store and going by their friend's house, They think they came straight home. So why do we do this? There's a couple reasons I want to toss out and just ask you to consider, and then I'm going to ask you to consider your own reasons. And the first, I think, is discipline. Discipline being the ability to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. Discipline is what carries us through the commitment long after the excitement of making the commitment was made. Right? So the difference in the salespeople who went home and sold $100,000 that year and the ones who just went back to work was the discipline. They went back to work and they said, now if I'm going to do this, these are the things that I have to do in order to do this. If we are going to exercise, we need a routine. We need a place, right? We need a program. We may need a coach. We may need a buddy. But we need to set up a system or an environment that helps us to succeed. Maybe we join a gym. Maybe we join a class. Maybe we sign up for online instruction. We get in front of our TV set at a certain time every day. But this consistency, it's almost like a church ritual. It's almost like a religious ritual. It is setting up a condition where you and your body know it's time to exercise. Dennis Merritt Jones, one year out at the conference center in Asilomar, he asked how many people had a dedicated room in their house to wash their body. And of course, everybody's hand went up. Everybody's got a bathroom. He said, how many people have a dedicated room in your house to wash your mind? And very few hands went up. Some people find that creating a little sacred space in the corner of their home, a little altar of sorts, if you want to call it that, maybe a candle, maybe a stick of incense, maybe a picture of somebody who inspires you, all of these little things. But these are just something that tells us that when we get into that spot, when we get into that place, we are there for a purpose. So one thing I'm going to suggest is, let's look at our spiritual practice. Let's look at our practice of spiritual mind treatment. Let's look at our practice of meditation. Let's look at our practice of reading and studying and listening to talks and all of those sorts of things. And review whether or not you have any set discipline around those, any set ritual around those, any set time, any set place. Are we trying to do our spiritual practice in between other things? Are we trying to do our spiritual practice if time permits? Are we trying to do a little bit here, a little bit there, and a little bit everywhere? If we do, what's going to happen is we are going to make that commitment, and then we're going to go right back to our old ways. The second thing that I invite you to consider is fear. Fear being an emotion, it's not going to go away. You're not going to talk it down. You're not going to talk it away. And we as human beings are possibly afraid to change. We don't know what it's going to be like to be just spiritual beings, right? Now we're all facing that. We're all facing the day that we're going to leave these bodies. So we might as well get used to what it is like now, but we don't know what it's like. And sometimes I think in our fear, what happens is we start to change, and then fear beats us back to the way we were. Now, if you think of this concept of the ego being an idea that you hold about who you are, what you are, and the way things ought to be, the way that I view it is the ego is very opinionated that it's right. Its only interest is in keeping you alive. In order for us to grow, we have to let go of the erroneous ideas that the ego holds to be true, and the ego feels threatened. So this is why we sit down to meditate, and we think we're gonna sit down, we're gonna get into a beautiful meditation, and our mind starts flitting here and flitting there and flitting everywhere. The ego is distracting us. It is taking us away, and sometimes it makes us afraid. This is why sometimes when people are doing deep spiritual growth, they get very emotional. They get angry. They lash out at people. They sob and weep and all kinds of deep emotions can come up for people. And the first couple times I ever saw that, I was kind of disturbed by it. You know, we'd go off to a religious retreat, and people would be walking around bawling their eyes out. And one of the older ministers says, "Oh, stuff's up. They came here to grow, and what they need to grow through has come up, and they're just working through it. It's all good. It's all God." So I think we have to ask ourselves, if we start on our growth, if we start a more disciplined practice, if we set aside a particular time, if we set aside a particular place, if we really dedicate ourselves to our spiritual growth as we would dedicate ourselves to our physical fitness, if we were trying to develop different bodies, if we do that and we start to feel grouchy, we don't know why. We start to feel irritated. We don't know why. We feel like, well, maybe I won't do that today. I'll do that another day. See, at least be aware of the possibility that it is your ego or your monkey mind that is trying to distract you. Now, how do you get past that? Discipline. Discipline. Feel the fear and do it. Susan Jeffers' book. Feel the fear and do it anyway. See, emotion does not follow logic and reason. You can talk to yourself until you're blue in the face and say there's no reason to be afraid. This is all good for you. This is great. This is going to help you experience a grander life and all of these things. And the ego doesn't buy it. The emotions do not buy it. They're still scared. But emotion follows activity. If you start to act as if, the emotion starts to subside. This is why in the military we're drilled and drilled and drilled and drilled of what to do. So when the time comes that we have to do it in extremely strenuous circumstances, when fear is really up, we do it anyway. We do it anyway, right? So courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. So I think what we want to do is we want to say to ourselves, my growth is important to me. I am excited to be able to realize that the presence of the divine is right here with me, right now with me. It has opened a door for me to walk through, but I must walk through it. I have to take that step, but more importantly, I've got to take the one after that, and then the one after that, and then the one after that. And when a distraction comes up, when I get afraid, or when I think, ooh, look over there, let's go over there, I have to say to myself, no, consistency, right? The Colorado River wore those rocks in the Grand Canyon down through consistency. Water is one of the softest things we know, and yet just by being water, it is able to carve through rocks with consistency. So I invite you to consider this Palm Sunday, this Easter season. Have you prepared yourself? Do you want to prepare yourself for a greater experience of the presence of the divine in your life? Now, that's not going to happen out there. There's only one place that's going to happen, and that's within. That means taking some time to be alone. That means taking some time to observe what's going on within you. It means setting up a discipline. It means creating your own ritual. Making a time and place. You set your intention, you see, your intention. My intention here. My intention now. My intention today is to experience more fully the presence of God. And then find the practice that works for you and do it. Do a spiritual mind treatment for something you want to grow. So you have to grow into it. See, this is the whole point of the 40 days and the 40 nights, and this is the point of treatment. And this is why sometimes it takes time. We have to grow into it. So the divine gives us a glimpse. It gives us a glimpse and it says, here, look at this. Look at this, taste this, experience this, come to this. And we know it's there, you see. But then we have to do what's necessary to grow into it. Do your treatment. How do you want to grow today? Do your meditation. Observe your mind when it's showing you all of the monkey mind distractions. And just ignore it. Right? Just say, oh look, there goes monkey mind. But I'm not here for that. I'm here to take my next step. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. We've already taken that step. We've already taken it together. But we have to take the next one. And we have to be consistent. And we have to eliminate distractions. And we have to make it our purpose. So I invite you this Palm Sunday, dedicate yourself, dedicate yourselves to not making a false start. Don't go back. Don't go back. It's not worth it. What you're looking for is ahead. Step through the door. Move towards that light. The yoke is sweet. The burden is light. That is what we came here for. Let's surrender to that purpose. And so it is. Alrighty then. Okay, and before I read the announcements, I'm going to mention those two books again because I think they're very worthwhile. If you didn't grow up in a Christian denomination, certainly the culture that we live in is greatly influenced by it, and both of these books would help you. The first book is by John Dominic Crossman, Crossman, and I believe the title is Jesus, a revolutionary biography. Right? He portrays Jesus as a revolutionary in his work, and the reason that he had to be put to death was because he was going against all of the things that everybody was afraid of. The second book is by Thomas Sheehan, and it's called The First Coming. And this is more about the first century Christians and the events of the first century and how the first century Christians came, it's more or less along the lines of another book is how Jesus became the Christ. When did Jesus stop being the carpenter's son and start being the Christ in their minds and in our minds, you see? And it's a very good book, and it tells things in a different way than we may have heard before. Closing treatment